Now available in paperback and e-readers, The Temptation of John Haynes. Given to temptation, pick up this action-packed African-American paranormal romance. Get The Temptation of John Haynes in paperback and e-readers today. Earlier this month, 22-year-old Amir Locke wound up losing his life as the result of a no-knock warrant on his apartment. Now, your Amir Locke was inside his apartment resting when he heard his door being opened by Minneapolis police, who were instituting a search warrant for a cousin who was wanted in a murder. Now, as the police had entered Amir Locke's home, your Amir Locke, shocked by his door being broken into, he pulled out what he says is a licensed firearm to defend himself. And as he pulled that firearm out to defend himself, he was shot and killed by Minneapolis police. Now, this whole incident with Amir Locke is a very troubling one because it shows how disingenuous these politicians are regarding so-called police reform. Now, it looks like to me that these politicians who talked about police reform in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis were not really being honest about giving Black American citizens of Minneapolis the police reform that they promised. Because one of the judges who signed off on the search warrant for the no-knock raid was the judge who presided over the murder trial of George Floyd. And that really shows me how your politicians behind the scenes were playing a chess game with Black Americans, and they probably thought that they could just get away with telling Black people what they wanted to hear, and then they were going to try to make a plan to go back to business as usual. And that's what it looks like they were doing as related to things behind the scenes after they went out and sacrificed your Derek Chauvin as related to the murder of George Floyd. They gave Black Americans a symbolic victory with the sacrifice of Derek Chauvin, and then wanted to go back to business as usual. This is why Black people need to be aware of the subtle politics transpiring around them and not caught up in their feelings. And that's what sadly happened here. Many Black people in Minneapolis and across the country got caught up in their feelings regarding the murder of George Floyd, not understanding that in order to get the tangible of justice and the tangible of policies to punish the police and create policies that prevent the people being terrorized by the police with things like no-knock warrants, you have to continue remaining vigilant as related to these individuals who are controlling institutions like law enforcement and controlling the levers of power in politics. And the big mistake most Black Americans made after the murder of George Floyd and charges were filed was continuing to go and vote blue no matter who, and continuing to support politicians who did not support guaranteeing that you would get the tangible of justice. Because right after the murder of George Floyd and charges were filed, what happened was your Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Frey, stopped being scared, and he stopped being scared because he no longer feared losing his job. He knew that he could go out here and take the Black vote for granted, and as he took the Black vote for granted, he managed to eke out a victory as mayor, to the same way that your Joe Biden managed to go out here and get a victory and become the next president of the United States. And without being held accountable to get tangibles in exchange for our votes, what happened was your Jacob Frey went back to business as usual, and that business as usual meant continuing to terrorize Black Americans with things like no-knock warrants. Now, some people in the Black community thought that no-knock warrants were supposed to be banned after Frey, and the city announced in November of 2020 they were going to ban no-knock warrants in Minneapolis. However, we're now finding out that no-knock warrants were not banned. They were actually, they rewrote the language to make it look like no-knock warrants were banned, but in actuality, it was a requirement that officers announce their presence and purpose for being there before entering a residence, even when executing a no-knock warrant. So what they did was change some weasel words and go back to, in order to go back to business as usual. And this is the kind of stuff that black people really need to be more vigilant of, because what your white supremacists love to do is rewrite language so that they can go back to doing the exact same thing that they said they weren't going to do in the first place. Now, your no-knock warrants really are not an effective way of capturing suspects, and they have not even worked ever since they were implemented back in the 1980s. Now, the no-knock warrant was originally designed to go after so-called drug suspects during the so-called war on drugs, but in most cases, they were usually used to terrorize black people, and they were used to terrorize black communities and make black communities fear law enforcement, because many of these no-knock warrants, they were oftentimes implemented based solely on the word of a police officer, based on faulty information from people like drug addicts and people like criminals, and they oftentimes did not lead to the capture of actual suspects. No, in a lot of cases, your no-knock warrants oftentimes led to the deaths of innocent people like Breonna Taylor, and it often led to civil lawsuits to the city that cost it hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars for the damage and mental and emotional distress that was placed on people after they had to deal with the trauma of having their homes broken in and being terrorized by law enforcement as related to going out here and stopping whatever so-called drugs that were out there or capturing so-called suspect. It is not an effective tool as related to capturing suspects, and we saw that in the aftermath of the murder of Amir Locke, that this did not lead to the capture of a suspect. No, it's just good, skilled police work that leads to the capture of suspects, and these types of tactics, they are not effective at all. All they do is breed mistrust between citizens and the police, and that's why there needs to be an end to your no-knock warrants. And in addition to there needing to be an end to a no-knock warrant, there also needs to be your disingenuous politicians being held accountable, because what your Jacob Frey did to your black citizens of Minneapolis was extremely dishonest, and for him to sit there and allow this policy to remain in place shows me that your black citizens need to be more vigilant about looking out for themselves, and they need to hold many of these politicians accountable. Many of those people had it right the first time when they were out here calling out your Jacob Frey and threatening not to support him, and they should have followed through on that promise by voting for another candidate who would have given them the tangible of justice. This man could not be trusted to give your Minneapolis black citizens the tangible of justice, and he allowed the institutions and the machinery to be there to allow many of those black citizens to be swerved once more. And that was their plan overall. And the only reason why we got the whole conviction of your Derek Chauvin is basically, again, because they wanted to sacrifice Derek Chauvin in order to appease the black masses and try to sate them in the hopes that they would not further turn up. But I say black people should have further turned up the pressure until they got all of these politicians out of office and got rid of these rogue police officers and the institutions that go out here and terrorize black people. In order to get to a system of justice and an institution of justice, you have to get rid of all of the unjust people and the people and create the infrastructure for injustice. And again, this just shows us how disingenuous many on the left are as related to getting so-called justice, because again, this is happening yet again in another blue city. And in this blue city that had practically been almost destroyed in the riots of George Floyd, they still show how they are still going to be belligerent about getting justice to foundational black Americans. And almost after an entire city got destroyed, they're still going to remain belligerent about trying to continue implementing their white supremacist policies. And that shows me that they would rather see an entire city destroyed than go out here and give black people justice and treat black people like human beings. Because again, the whole policy of no-knock warrants is about terrorism and is not about capturing suspects. It is about putting fear in people in black communities, and it is about putting fear of black people of the police. It is all about scaring black people and making them afraid to be able to just live and be a part and have a normal life. It is all about making black people feel like less than, because the whole point of it is to let people know that if you even do something that we disagree with, we will send our race soldiers and they will wage war on you. That is basically what these warrants really are all about. They are not about going out here and capturing your suspects, because as we see after the murder of Amir Locke, just like in the case of Amadou Diallo, who got shot 41 times, there are other methods that law enforcement can use that are far more effective than this archaic approach of breaking into somebody's home and going out here and putting the fear of God in them. So when I look at this whole situation with Amir Locke, it just shows me how black people have to continue pushing hard for justice, and we cannot rely on groups like Black Lives Matter and other groups out here to take control of our narratives and our agenda. Police reform is something that we need to have in place, and we have to understand that in order to get towards police reform, we have to go out here and continue putting the pressure on, and we have to continue demanding in order to get justice, because it's clear that those who are controlling the system, they really do not respect black people. And this right here with the murder of Amir Locke and going back to business as usual shows how little respect they have for black people, even after black people practically almost destroyed many cities in this country. Many of these same people still do not show black people respect, and they still do not regard a black man's life as having any value, because they continue to believe that they can just give people a few little empty symbolic gestures and empty symbolic crumbs, and that's not the way it should be. In order to get tangibles, you have to go out here and demand respect, and the only way to demand respect is you might have to take the votes, take away the jobs of many of these politicians to show them how serious you are. And that is why it is important for black people to understand the importance of having a black agenda, demanding tangibles, and holding your votes from those who are blue, because they don't matter who you are. They just want to go back to promoting the same white supremacy to you, to go back to their business of usual of oppressing you. Now, this video will not be monetized, and if you want to see me make more videos like this, I need you to donate to the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box or picking up some of the SJS Direct books on Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose. The man who rules the world runs into the irresistible force of a man with nothing to lose in this action-packed, all-new John
variant editions of John Haynes, The Man with Nothing to Lose.